I'll start off with a quote from Bruce Lee, which I probably said before, which is that I fear not the man that has practiced 1,000 kicks once. I fear the man that has practiced one kick 1,000 times. And this is a really good insight, at least, into just the idea of mastering something, right? And to be the master of one specific thing. And I feel as though when people talk about champion pools or whatnot and how many champions that this pro player has played or whatever, they get lost in the sauce of just how, I guess, uninspiring that is, in the sense that, well, yeah, they have all these other champions, but are they really that great of a player anyways? Is any of their champions rather feared in that regard? So you think of players like Nuke Duck. He's very famous for having a champion Ocean, right? You think of Power of Evil. You think of Keen, if you want to go a little bit further back into the OGs. All these players are good, or rather were good, right, in the case of Keen. But they're not great. They're not great players. And I'm talking about like truly elite level, right? And I feel as though because they put more of an emphasis on learning multiple different champions, and rather they just didn't try and focus upon the little ones that they did know to level up their own game with those champions. And so I think there's an idea which is pretty prevalent, I think, within at least the scrim culture of pro teams, which is that scrims are very valuable time, right? Like you're wasting, or I guess you're spending rather, the time of 4 other people on your team along with your coaching staff, right? So, and that includes, your analyst, or, your second analyst if you have 2. You're doing your head coach. You're doing your assistant coach. So it's a lot of fucking people in order to say, hey, I want to do this strat. I have this champion. I've been playing them quite a lot, and I want to get it in here, and then I want to do this other champion that I've done and this champion. And it's just best not to waste that time in doing like these cheese type strategies just because you think maybe this champion fits in this particular scenario or whatnot. But maybe your team actually just isn't very comfortable playing with that champion, right? It's a very off-meta pick of some sort. And so it's going to take a little bit for them to be accustomed to actually, first of all, how that champion is played at a high level, because they probably haven't seen it played at a high level. And then how does it function in a professional game, because the only time they probably have seen it is within solo queue. So it's all this culminating factors. And then if the coaching staff then wants to kind of hone in on this and make this one of their strategies and how to fit it into the broader piece of their own puzzle. And then, of course, there's the idea of, well, how valuable is it if maybe that champion gets nerfed, right? And so it becomes this idea to where of just time investment and whether the effort is worth, if the juice is worth the squeeze in that regard, you know what I mean? So, and on top of that, it's the idea of, well, does this help in other areas and is applicable to different strategies? See, like that's the broader difference of maybe a one trick and whatnot, is that a one trick, yeah, you can learn that one champion, teach all your teammates how that champion functions, and it's all good to go. But if you start then playing multiple different champions, man, I don't know, maybe you play Vel'Koz, right? And then you also play like a weird ass, I don't know, Akali bot lane or some shit, I don't know. It's the idea that, okay, you're going to have to spend some time investment into this. Your other teammates are going to have to spend that time investment as well too. So is it really worth it at the end of the day? And I think one underrated aspect of one tricks specifically, let's go on the polar opposite end, is that one tricks should be a good indication of how actually dangerous ultimate mastery is on one specific champion. You think of players that have played Riven or Zed or Lee Sin, Aurelion Sol, shout out to Hui, is that these are champions which normally you don't see in pro play, aside from Lee Sin, you don't see in pro play, but when it's in the hands of this one particular player, it becomes very feared, right? Like, for instance, Faker's Riven mid was very feared. A lot of people forget that shit, right? I was just looking up a video the other day. It was a barcode killer, and it just had a montage of Faker's shit in mid and how he was actually a Riven one trick back in the day. It's pretty cool. But regardless, is that showing how valuable one tricks are. I mean, because you think of just a one trick and the positives in which it brings. They've played every single match up to like 10 plus times at a very high level, right? They played every single matchup. Every matchup that you can imagine in mid lane, they fucking played it because they played the champion so many times, and eventually they're going to run into it in solo queue. So that's the advantage, is that they know what to do in every single situation when it comes to lane matchups. Now, the whole team cohesion and whatnot, yeah, they learn that along the way, but in a pro setting, it is quite vastly different. So that's where it doesn't translate necessarily, but with their own experience, they're able to adapt to their own teammates rather than someone that has a champion ocean. It's rather that the team has to adapt to them because they actually don't know their champion to the high intricacies that maybe someone as a one-trick pony would. On top of that, a one-trick also is ban-worthy by the enemy team. That should show you how dangerous something can get if someone is a master at a specific champion. So the reasons why I think champion oceans are desired is because of patches, right? Because someone could just either completely get banned out, right? Like, say, a lot of the Ribbon 1 tricks, for instance, they could just get completely banned out and then they kind of just look shit on everything else. Or the patch could just completely nerf a specific champion, right? But just like with most things in life, balance is very key. You need to be able to play multiple different champions, some of which are highly meta, and that's what you should focus on primarily, is just meta champions and learning those, but then have a couple pocket picks in the back, because I think that's very necessary in terms of champions that you have mastered previously to a very high level. And also, I don't think it's talked about enough to where champions that you try and focus on because they are meta specific within that particular patch, like that's good experience, and that can kind of snowball your champion ocean. But as with all things, you get rusty if you don't practice them enough as well too. So some of those champions, which someone was heralded as a good player on whatever specific champion, a Victor or an Azir or whatnot, it's like some of that shit actually changes. Maybe even some of the mechanics change with the champion itself, and obviously there's item changes as well too. So I think one big wrench, at least within this idea, is that flex picks are the major exception and should be supremely focused on. I did a video a while back talking about how flex picks are the next measure of greatness of a player. And I still actually think that's kind of true to an extent, just because it gives so much power to your coaching staff and your analysts and whatnot to create different team compositions and make things a little bit more malleable so they don't get stuck or caught with their pants down within an entire draft. I think it's very good, in fact. So those things, yes, I believe should be focused on, very much a priority. And I don't know, maybe you should actually become a one trick of a flex pick so that, you can then flex pick. I think that's the ultimate move right there. Whole point though, is that basically if a pick doesn't fit your play style, don't feel forced to play it, right? There's been many times to where players have tried to play a specific champion within a particular meta and it just doesn't fit their play style, right? Like you think of, for instance, fucking double lift with Vlad or Reckless with Mage's bot lane, so they don't need to feel forced in that sense to have a champion ocean, right? And to kind of go against the grain and just play towards your own needs, or maybe just your own particular play style, because not everything is going to fit towards your play style, even if it is strong in the patch. But just as I said, champion oceans, I think, are completely overrated in the broader sense, in the broader term. And I think it's very overlooked at how much a particular mastery of a couple specific different champions that you have could push you a long ways within the professional landscape.